8 women and 189 men have received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine since it was first awarded in 1901. Dr. Blackburn and her co-recipient, Carol Greider's inception into this elite group is a great honor to both of them. As Chancellor of UCSF, I'm thrilled for Dr. Blackburn. As a fellow woman scientist, I'm proud that this distinguished researcher has been recognized. May her honor today inspire the next generation of female and male scientists, and may the elite group of female Nobel laureates increase exponentially in the years to come. Now, before I introduce Liz, I am very happy to tell you that we've just received this proclamation from the City and County of San Francisco, from our mayor, Mayor Newsom, and I'll read the end of it. Therefore, be it resolved that I, Gavin Newsom, Mayor of the City and County of San Francisco, in celebration of her 2 a.m. wake-up call, how long have you been awake, Liz? From the Nobel Committee for receiving the 2009 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, do hereby proclaim October 5th, 2009 as Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn Day in San Francisco. So Liz, come up and... Liz wants to know if this changes her parking rights.
3 after 6.
No tickets.
3 after 6.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sue. This is just such an exciting moment for me. I'm finally waking up now. I've been feeling pretty dazed. First of all, there's the 5 stages of, grieving or something, and I've had the 5 stages of happiness, and I went through, where's the phone, to disbelief, to dazed, to I think it's sinking in now, to I'm just so happy to have had this happen at UCSF, and thank you for coming to this gathering. Now, what's the form? People ask me questions.
So we'd be happy to entertain questions now. The Chancellor will serve.
So I'll be the moderator, so that Liz gets a couple of minutes to think about your questions if you have any.
Well, sure, I'll ask. I read a profile, I think it was the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, and you were on their short list of people who might get this award. How prepared were you for this? How much did it take you by surprise?
I was pretty surprised because I've heard rumors like this a little bit before, and so I just sort of thought, there's so much wonderful science that goes on, and so many fantastic scientists that, the chances of it happening to you seem very remote in some way. So I took note of it, but I didn't really think it was going to happen last night, and I was pretty excited when it did. So I wasn't very prepared.
I asked Liz if she had banked on her sleep, but she hadn't.
No.
Maybe you'll sleep well tonight, Liz.
I think I will.
Other questions? There's a question right here.
Glenn Chapman, I don't smoke press. How effectively do you think your research has been built upon? And then where do you think it should go from here? Like, what's the promise that this holds for everybody on the planet?
Well, the first is easy because so many wonderful people have gone into the field of telomeres and telomerase, and I think very exciting science is done by, I don't know how many countless hundreds or thousands of people. And so it's just a great joy to see something where, we planted sort of some humble seeds. Now we see these tremendous, really interesting research efforts and tremendous kind of intellectual advances in understanding what goes on in cells, which is what really drove me to do this research. So there's no question that there are tremendously impressive scientists at work all around the world doing work in this field of telomeres and telomerase and its ramifications. Where is it going? Basic scientists I'll give you a frivolous answer first, which is that if you're a basic scientist and if you know the answer, you're bored already. It's just not interesting because biology is so complex that you don't really know what surprises you'll get. But we can see the shape of where things are going, and and our Chancellor mentioned some of these very interesting glimmers of ways in which we could manipulate the enzyme telomerase, which is what maintains the chromosome ends and replenishes them, and perhaps use that in clinical settings, perhaps for keeping cells multiplying that we want to have multiplying, and we can think of regenerating cells in our body that we would like to keep multiplying. And conversely, in cancer cells, which are very different cells, but they exploit telomerase for their own bad ends, damping it down in that particular setting. So there's very interesting ramifications in terms of being able to exploit this knowledge in the context of all the other biomedical research, which is advancing so rapidly in so many fronts. And so you put this into a context and you say, aha, I think there's a place here along with all of the other research. But I can't tell you, which cure would happen tomorrow or anything like that. But I think the possibilities are there.
How far out do you think a practical approach?
I can never answer in any realistic way. The question that patients really want to know is when will it help me? And for something like a drug, we certainly don't have any. I'm not doing the research, but those doing it, there's no clear-cut answers, just as we would hear for any drug. For some of the other questions about understanding telomerase and perhaps manipulating it by interventions that are not related to drugs, because we know chronic stress is very bad for telomere maintenance and telomerase, can we do something about it? We're just at the beginning of some controlled trials, with people to see. So I hope we could answer that better in a couple of years.
Question here?
I wonder if you could speak about the different roles of academic basic research and corporate research, whether the two are distinct in your minds, and following on that, are
Yes.
you destined for academia, or would you ever work at a corporate lab?
Well, I think you're asking a very, very important question. What about corporate versus academic research? I think their goals are very different. In academic research, I'll give you an example. I went to my lab in Berkeley and I was working with a pond scum organism, and I was just following my nose, doing experiments that were related to the curiosity I felt about what was the end of a chromosome like. That would look pretty bad in a business plan, and especially since I had no clue as to what the answer would be. But that's the beauty of the UC system, that there's very strong academic basic research and clinical research of the kind that lets you ask questions that are not necessarily for a commercial reason. Now, research then comes to points where there's a clear goal and you say, here's an application, here's a place where it would make sense to now focus the question in on a very specific set of goals, and that's where I think the corporate setting is ideally, that's the goal, is to have end products that can be used. But it comes from the sort of wellspring of basic research, which I think is what academics really can bring. So what you want to do is have both going, because you want to have the next generation of things being, in the pipeline as basic science in order to feed into the applied uses, which would be often well carried out in a corporate setting. So they're rather different in my mind. I happen to love doing what I want to do, which is following my nose and asking about the science. So I'd probably be terrible in a corporation setting.
We could have a first business plan around pond scum. I like. Yes.
It's cheap to grow.
It's cheap to grow. There you go.
Hi, Liz. Congratulations. Have you spoken to Carol, and can you speak to us about the role of graduate students in biomedical research?
Yes, Carol was one of the first people I called, and she was just about to email me, so we had a very excited conversation at 2-something, 2:01, or I don't know, some very early conversation this morning, and I couldn't reach Jack because I couldn't find his number in my phone book, but I'll have that conversation very soon with him. The role of graduate students? Well, they're the sort of lifeblood of how the new generation of science is happening, and Carol was in that generation in the 80s when she was in my lab at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. I moved to UCSF in 1990, and so it's one of these things where graduate students have creativity and I think the worst thing to do is to not let that creativity blossom. And so the question is how you grow a graduate student into not just being somebody who follows directions, but somebody who needs introduction to the field, and then you want them to nurture their own ideas and to become very independent. And so Carol was, of course, a wonderful example of such a student. But, UC is rich in such students. I've been blessed with them for decades in the UC system, first at Berkeley and now at UCSF. I really think they're where all the action grows out from. And I hope we'll continue to have very strong graduate programs.
Yes, there's a question.
Few among us can imagine getting that 2 a.m. call. Can you recount what they actually say to you when you win the Nobel Prize? And then also, what do you think this will mean for your research and having this moment?
Well, I won't say it word for word, but as I groped in the dark and some very, very well-spoken voice identified something, Sweden and Nobel Prize and committee were in the word there. So that was a good start. But then you kind of think, well, how many of your friends have a really great sense of humour? So I wanted to keep listening. I didn't, and so I kept listening. And I think he is used to the somewhat incredulous feeling people have, because he quickly explained that it would be backed up in more solid form and writing and stuff like that. And I think I really believed it by the end of the conversation. And at some point, he did explain that the press would be interested and advised me to have a cup of coffee. So I think I was sounding pretty out of it.
Yes.
And what do you think this will mean for your future
Sorry.
research?
What?
What do you think this will mean for your future research? How will it have an impact?
Well, I hope it'll leave me lots of time to do it, because there's nothing I love more than, the research program that goes on. I have a fantastic lab here at UCSF, and that's what we do. And so I hope it helps in the sense that there's more broad recognition that this is an interesting field, although I have to say, I've been very pleased with how the field is recognized as an interesting one. That's really been true for a long time. And so I think it'll be, good in the sense that it's providing inspiration to people that this is a field that is really considered seriously. And I just hope it doesn't take me too much away from what I love doing, which is research.
There's a question right here.
The Chancellor gave a count, men, women, I think it was 8 to 189 Nobel Prizes in this area. Can you address that as a woman and what you think your winning might do for women in the field?
Well, I think, very much I hope that this is an example where women look and say, yes, women do win prizes in science, in Nobel Prizes in science, and they have, but as you said, much more sparsely than men have. And as we have more and more women who come into the research career track, and there's attrition at certain stages, and so examples of people like Carol and I who've been able to have productive, exciting careers is something that I'm choking, not from emotion, but because sorry, I'm going to drink water. Yes, so I think just seeing that it can be done, just seeing a woman's face winning Nobel Prizes, I think says to younger women entering sciences, oh, this is not impossible.
Yeah, but Liz is too humble to say, but I will tell you for sure that on campus and around the world, before she won the Nobel Prize, Dr. Blackburn already is a great role model, not just for women scientists, but for scientists. Didn't need the prize to know that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Doctor, besides your research, what other enjoyable things you like to do in your life?
Well, I have a lovely family. I was just at my mother-in-law's 95th birthday party.
Microphone.
I was just at my mother-in-law's 95th birthday party and down in Southern California, and I enjoy family time. I have a son who's now graduated, and And mostly the advice that I can give him is related to household things. Young guy starting his new apartment, he has advice that parents can give him. And I like music, both playing the piano myself very badly these days, but I love music and listen to music whenever I can, and play the piano when the house is empty enough to tolerate my bad playing. And I like walking. What a wonderful place we live in for being outdoors. And so I really, really like walking and just being outdoors.
Is there a simplistic way for you to explain how these enzymes work?
The one enzyme I'm talking about is telomerase. It's actually singular. The one and only, it turns out. And so the chromosomes that we have in our cells, which carry all the genetic information, have protective tips which wear down over time as cells keep trying to renew themselves through our lives. The tips of the chromosomes are always wearing down. So these tips are called telomeres, and they're like, we make a little analogy, they're like the tips at the end of a shoelace, and they stop the end of the shoelace fraying away. Telomerase builds them back up. And funnily enough, in humans, there's not a huge amount of telomerase for unknown reasons. And sometimes it looks as though cells run a little low on the supply of the replenishment of the telomeres. And we think this is one of the things that contributes to how, as we age, certain diseases might have their onset related to this. So the enzyme basically is building back the tips of the shoelaces and counteracting their erosion, which would happen otherwise.
And in similarly approachable language, could you maybe give the background if you said you followed your nose into this research?
Yes.
I mean, what sparked the curiosity?
It was way in the days before DNA sequencing was even worked out. And so, I, like everybody, was just very curious about what DNA sequences they were in chromosomes, and particularly at the ends, which were known to be protective at the ends of chromosomes. And I just wanted to know what was there. So it sounds very simple, but really nobody knew. And so I had trained in the lab of Fred Sanger in Cambridge in England, and had become very intrigued by the idea of you could apply the newly nascent methods of DNA sequencing, all of which meant cobbling things together, to the ends of chromosomes. And the system in which I could do that was one that my postdoctoral advisor, Joe Gall, at Yale University, where I did my postdoctoral work, had discovered very tiny, very short chromosomes, lots and lots of them in the pond scum organism Tetrahymena. And so that gave an abundance of ends that I could molecularly characterize, and the ends were so peculiar that suggested there was some new enzyme at work. And that was the recognition that Carol and Jack and I are having today, is that various ways we pieced together things, and we went out and hunted for the enzyme and found it.
There's a question over here in this.
Have you had any thoughts on how you might want to spend your meetings?
Not many. No. Well, sometimes a little bit of seed money in the lab to just do a little bit of a project that you haven't got formal funding for, and you might like to just try it out. That's one of the things that's occurring to me that would be a nice use of the money. Sometimes you just have a little idea and you just think, this would be great to try it, without a lot of formal grant writing, and then if it's good, it'll turn into grant writing. And a number of our research areas have worked that way. And NIH funding often really is very conducive to that. My funding that allowed me to look for telomerase was to ask how telomeres worked. It didn't say, I will find telomerase, right? But it said, how do they work? And so it was a broad enough question that one could run with the science.
Chancellor, you had your career at Genentech. How interested is private pharma, especially more innovative pharmaceutical companies, interested in the doctor's work?
Dr. Blackburn's work is of intense interest to both biotech and pharmaceutical companies. As Liz said, the work, particularly in cancer, is now in early stage clinical trials, but the biology behind how cells age and how cells either decide to start or stop or continue to divide has been of intense interest. So the work is incredibly important, both for basic biology, but also for applied clinical science in getting to human beings, but is in the early stage of testing.
Melissa, do you still get...
boss.
After you.
Do you still get those wonderful questions about the fountain of youth? And in first grade, the discovery that we're going to turn back aging with all of them?
Well, sometimes. Are you asking one? I don't think clocks will be turned back, but it's a question of whether we could expand our health span. I think most people are interested in a healthy life, long years of health. And the onset of age-related diseases is, the converse side of that. And if this is one of the ways that impacts on when diseases of aging will set in, then to that extent it's, sort of fountain of youth. But I think people mean a lot of different things when they say that. Sometimes they mean living many, many years and, hundreds of years or something like that. And we don't necessarily see any particular direct relevance of that idea, but the number of years of health is related, in healthy years of healthy living, which is a parameter measurable in large cohorts, is related to telomere length, for example. So I think that's the aspect of the fountain of youth that seems a more realistic reflection of what's going on.
It looks like the research is leading to this relationship between stress and this stuff that you've discovered. And so
Stuff, I like it.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's good. It's good. It's good.
And so what has that meant to you, or what are you starting to believe that the impact of stress? And there's certainly a lot of news about stress and what that means to people. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Yes. So I don't believe I do data, I like to say. So there are data in the studies where the association with less good maintenance of telomeres through having dampened enzyme, shorter telomeres, those associations are there. This is work that my colleague, Dr. Alyssa Eppel, in the Department of Psychiatry, she really led these studies that we collaborated in starting in the early 2000s. And we've done, it was one cohort that we published, and we have more. And we keep seeing this same kind of association. Causality, we think because there was one particular aspect of one of the studies we did which really made it look as if the stress is really causing the telomeres to be shorter and dampening down the telomerase. And the other studies, we can certainly infer that that's the case, but there was one particular study where it really looked like causality. So I believe data. That's what so that's very interesting and compelling, because the answers keep being very consistent now in multiple cohorts that other studies have been done by others. One keeps seeing the same trend, and so that starts to have a ring of reality to it. So then the question is, what do you do about it? And so that's where controlled clinical design trials trying to intervene in it are very interesting. And we're just at the very, very cusp, the very beginning of such collaborative studies, again with our colleagues at UCSF. Well, these would be not of a drug per se, but interventions in people's lives and fairly intensive sort of changes that people make. So these would be in otherwise generally healthy cohorts. So this is just at the very beginning. Yeah. So we shall see. But because it works in the converse way, that we see the association is very, the association is quite clear in the bad way, then the inference is that things may get better in the good direction. And that's what we would like to ask in a well-controlled, careful way. A couple of little pilots have indicated already that we can see changes that relate to some reduction in stress and improvements in cardiovascular function. Just very, very beginning pilot study we had last year. So,
does that mean you're a fan of afternoon naps?
I wish I had the time for afternoon naps, but I am a fan of, of exercise and trying to. I should distinguish stress, by the way. We all do stress, but there's a challenge stress that we do, and then there's threat stress, which is out of control, unpredictable, and so forth. The one that is imposed by, for example, someone who's a primary caregiver of somebody who's a long-term illness, a dementia patient, or a child with chronic illness, those sorts of long-term stresses with a lot of lack of control of the situation. Now, we all complain bitterly about our stress, but actually, the sort of high stress that we all experience in our jobs, most of us, is challenge stress, and doesn't hurt us.
Another question here?
Growing up in Australia, an era where there weren't a lot of women doing this type of thing.
Yes.
What inspired you as a young girl, or why did you decide on this field? Can you give us some insight into maybe your mentors or what your inspirations were?
I had, I think, a couple of influences. My parents were both family physicians, and so my mother was, her friends were people who, like her, had been educated, and so it seemed very natural to me that women would be having interesting careers and being educated well and so forth, even though many people, were not in careers who were women when I was growing up. But in my family, there was at least one good example. My aunt was a family physician. And so, I just saw that and I think took that in. And then, like all children, I read, and I was totally captivated by the biography of Marie Curie, written by her daughter. I absolutely was captivated by the life of the scientist that was evoked in that book. I think that really made quite an impression on me as probably a preteen or whatever I was at the time. And I went to an all-girls school, which I think was a helpful thing, because even though I was kind of nerdier, the word didn't exist then, but probably nerdier than most of my classmates, I think there weren't certain social pressures that sometimes are more distracting for girls in schools. And various programs like the SEP program here at UCSF has programs recognizing that girls in, say, middle school benefit by having science clubs for girls, things like that. So there are ways of doing this in a co-ed setting, for sure, as children grow up, and girls in particular grow up. There are ways of making science-friendly environments. And I happened to be in the setting of a school where there were girls, and so that was the setting I had. Yeah, so I think the family influence and reading.
Have you seen funding cuts affected your lab or your colleagues' labs, or otherwise your professional life?
I have been fortunate because I do have federal funding, which is not state funding, but I am impacted. I think I have a pay cut coming up. Get a Nobel Prize, have a pay cut. Is this causality? The order of events is like that, but I don't imply. Anyway, but there's a very serious point, which is that I think UC is a huge boon to the state of California. It's a wellspring of ideas, of educated people, of innovation, and it sort of breaks my heart to see it being under attack. I don't mean that literally, but in this sad state, and so we really, really have to do what we can to ameliorate this situation, because what UC brings to the state is huge. I've been a tremendous beneficiary of it. I was able to do research with really, really tremendous colleagues and students and trainees, and who were attracted to the UC system because it has such high standards, and so while I immediately am not seriously impacted by it personally, I feel that we really have to make sure we keep it's a real treasure, this UC system, and I when I went to Berkeley, I loved the idea that somebody could go to Berkeley who wasn't from a wealthy family necessarily. They could get in and thrive, and the access for students to the UC system is just a really tremendous aspect of the system.
So, last question.
For the doctor, congratulations. And for the past few years, the winners of the Nobel Prize, their research field is more related to the gene or the virus. So is this the trend for the research, or what does it mean to you?
Oh, I think that, in biomedical sciences, biology is so complicated. All different aspects play in. Genes are tremendously important. Viruses give us, huge windows on understanding infectious diseases, which is, part and parcel of what's going on in human biology. And our work is now coming in with a different angle. So I don't think there's any monolithic trend in one type or other. I mean, the richness of biological sciences is it brings in, bioinformatics and biophysics and chemistry and all sorts of different things can be brought to bear on biological questions and biomedical questions. So I don't see any unidirectional trend here. I think there's so many exciting areas in biological sciences that who knows which ones will be prominent next year.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us and congratulating Dr. Blackburn on the special day. Thanks for coming.